I'm Sashko. I'm from the Apollo team, and we're a team that works a lot with the community on a lot of GraphQL tools and in general on growing the GraphQL ecosystem. So like everyone else who's presented, first I want to just start off and give a super quick intro about what GraphQL is in the first place. And the one sentence summary is that it's a query language for your API. So most of the APIs people are using today, when they're not using GraphQL, is they're calling endpoints. And in some sense, with those endpoints, you can think of the query language as query parameters, path segments, the domain, stuff like that. So what GraphQL does is it specifies, instead of that, a query language to define what data you're looking for. Some of its main features are that it's self-documenting, so you can easily organize your data and know what's available. Because you select exactly the fields you need with the query language, you can only fetch the data you need, so you can eliminate what we call overfetching. You can also request multiple resources, even nested ones at the same time, so you can avoid request waterfalls like you might see in your network tab all the time. And the best part for me is that there's this super extensive community that I'll get into in a minute about client libraries, server libraries, all kinds of developer tools to help make developing with GraphQL really awesome. So the easiest way to understand what GraphQL is to see it for yourself. So I'm gonna do like a 2-second demo here. But basically here you see on the left a GraphQL query, and on the right you see a GraphQL result. One of the primary features that you can see is that the result has the exact same shape of the query. And then just the one thing I want to demonstrate here is that you can add additional fields and see those show up in the result, right? So this is an example app we've built that has like a public interface to this great tool that you can use to write queries. So for example, we can say, okay, we want to get the stars, and you can see because it's self-documenting, it auto-completes right there in the tool. So we hit enter to add that field in there. We click play, and then we're going to see that extra field show up on the right. So now you can see in the result, we now have the stars for all those repositories that we were fetching. All right, so we've seen a little bit about what it's like to use GraphQL. You can extrapolate from that. Learn about it. So like I said, the most important part is that it's not a library or a product. It's not a repository on GitHub. It's not a particular service. It's a specification currently maintained by Facebook. They originally introduced it in 2015. And a bunch of people work together on that and all the tools. Like I said, it provides a schema for your entire set of data, and also that query language that I was showing that lets you retrieve that data really easily. And another really important thing that people don't always realize is that it's incrementally adoptable. So you can use it with virtually any kind of client or server-side architecture. Anywhere where you can make an HTTP request or even any other protocol, you can use GraphQL to describe the data you're looking for. And in 2017, this presentation is kind of like the current state of GraphQL. It's really, really heating up. All kinds of organizations are starting to adopt it, not only for their internal APIs, but even some are starting for their public API. Like GitHub was one of the trailblazers in September of last year. They released the first ever widely used public GraphQL API. And some other people are going to follow with that as well. So you'll be able to get public data in a much more convenient way. So like I said, it's a specification. So the biggest news in the community is always specification updates. And the newest thing in GraphQL right now are GraphQL subscriptions. So the spec usually comes out on a schedule of about every 6 months. And the last one was in October. So we're expecting a new release of the specification in April. And hopefully one of the things that's going to be in there is this concept of GraphQL subscriptions. So GraphQL originally was released with queries for fetching data and mutations for updating that data. And what subscriptions do is they let you also have the ability to get a real-time stream of data. So basically you take a server-side pub subsystem or something similar like that, and you can push those messages to the client. And because it's GraphQL, you can select exactly what information you want about every single message. So you can get that pub sub message, attach additional data to it, stuff like that. So one interesting tidbit here is people often ask, what's the difference between subscriptions and something like live queries? Because they're both ways to think about real-time data. And I think live queries are something a little bit more like Firebase, for example, where you select a set of data and you expect to get notified whenever that data changes. You can think of it as just like really optimized polling. But subscriptions, the thing that's landing in GraphQL, is a little bit different. It's a more limited but easier to manage approach, which specifically talks about events and pushing those messages to the client. So that's the biggest news in the GraphQL specification right now. And let's get into some of the open source tools that people are working on. So probably the most important part of every GraphQL architecture that you can't really get by without is a GraphQL server. And just like you can build a REST API in any server-side technology, you can do the same with GraphQL. So there's server libraries available in pretty much every popular server-side technology and framework, Ruby, Rails, Node, all of that great stuff. And you guys can find those on graphql.org/code. That's where a central place where people can list their various libraries. And the new news in that department is Walmart Labs recently, just a few weeks ago, announced their server-side GraphQL implementation that they're using for products like Sam's Club or other websites, which is implemented in Clojure. So if you want to be using the same thing that Walmart is using for some of their APIs, you can check that out. And then the other dimension of GraphQL, the other dimension is clients. So like I said, you can fetch GraphQL from anywhere where you can just hit an HTTP endpoint. But you can get some benefits if you use a more sophisticated client that does some caching for you. Because with GraphQL, you can fetch all these different queries with different shapes of results. Basic HTTP caching that caches on a per request basis doesn't give you everything you need. And you can learn a little bit more about that in the documentation of these various clients. But the really big news right now is just in the last month or so, the two most major GraphQL client libraries for JavaScript are both releasing 1.0 releases. So Apollo client is the one that I actually have spent a lot of time working on, named Apollo, just like the team that I'm on. And it works with all different JavaScript technologies like React, Angular, Next.js, Redux, and we're always trying to make it more modular and more compatible. And it's also super community-oriented and flexible. And currently it happens to be the most popular GraphQL client for JavaScript. Relay is a GraphQL client that was announced by Facebook at the same time as they released GraphQL in the first place, almost a year and a half ago. And recently it underwent almost complete rewrite to become a lot faster and simpler. And it has a more opinionated architecture that fits well with how Facebook does things internally. So I think it's super awesome that even in some, GraphQL has always felt niche in the past, but I think now it's really becoming like a mainstream thing, and you can see that just by the diversity of tools that are available there. And I know that I'm here at this event called This.JavaScript, but I'd be remiss not to mention native mobile clients, because when you have an API technology, you want to make sure that you can access that from any of your clients or any of your API consumers. And so there are also libraries that not only let you fetch GraphQL queries easily from Swift on iOS or Java on Android, but they also do code generation, because GraphQL is strongly typed and it has types for all data in your schema, and so is the programming language, which is a little bit different from JavaScript. And so you can get really nice auto-completion and validation in your editor and stuff like that. And so you guys can check those out on GitHub. And one thing I'm really, really excited about, things that we're going to be working on pretty soon, is an opportunity to integrate that with the JavaScript client. So for example, if you're using React Native or a similar architecture where you have both JavaScript code and native code at once, you can actually share data between those two clients and have parts of your app implemented fully in native and parts of your app implemented in React or JavaScript, and maybe fetch data in the background or share the cache data, stuff like that. And working with some great organizations like New York Times, Shopify, and Airbnb that you saw on that slide up front of who's using GraphQL. And perhaps one of the most exciting things about GraphQL, like the tool that I showed you, is developer tools, because you have this not only a strongly typed API, but you have this nice query language to interact with it that gives you a whole new space of developer tools to explore for APIs and data fetching. So the tool that I showed you, which is kind of like an auto-completing query editor, is called Graphical, and it was one of the first awesome GraphQL tools that was released almost right after GraphQL itself was released. And that's something almost everybody uses to interact with their API, and it means you don't need to open up a terminal and type curl or anything of that nature. Then there are also a lot of really great tools coming out around query validation, extracting those queries from your code, something we call persisted queries, which is about telling your server ahead of time what queries are going to happen, because GraphQL seems like it can be quite dynamic, But if you can tell the server ahead of time, you can make sure people aren't sending you queries that you don't expect. One other thing that we released late last year that we're really excited about are a set of Chrome dev tools for Apollo Client that actually look inside the client-side store or the cache, much like Redux dev tools or similar, and they show you what data has been fetched, what's in your cache, what is being sent over the network, things like that. And the new thing in this space, which I'm really, really excited about, is a new project from Facebook that everyone in the community is working together on called the GraphQL language service. And the goal there is to give you the same experience you get in this Graphical tool, which is like a standalone web IDE type thing. But you can get that right inside your normal code editor IDE. So you can open up IntelliJ or Visual Studio Code or Atom or whatever you like to use. You can start typing GraphQL queries in there right in your code, and it'll validate it for you, autocomplete it for you. So you really never have to go and look at API docs like ever again. And that's great because I really don't like looking at API docs. I'm sure most people don't either. So that's pretty much the state of the tools for the stuff. And I think, like I said, the most important thing about GraphQL is the community. And there's also a lot of great community events that happened recently and are coming up. So there's already been the first GraphQL conference where over 350 developers met up in San Francisco. It was called GraphQL Summit. You guys can check out all the talks at graphqlsummit.com. They're all there in a nice grid. And there's actually going to be another one this October, so it's going to be one every year in San Francisco.
Hey there. Are you into reactive programming using JavaScript? Do you have to deal with asynchrony in your web app? Then join this instructor Ben Lesh to learn all of the ins and outs of RxJS in his hands-on workshop. Available online and in person, go to rxworkshop.com for more details and to book your spot today. Hey there. Do you use Angular? Do you like fun in the sun? And how do you feel about boats? If you're nodding yes, then come join us on NG Cruise to learn more about Angular while on a fabulous Caribbean cruise. Check out ngcruise.com for speaker lineup, workshop details, and to book your spot today.